You're listening to Comic Reflections, episode 304. I'm your host, Nicholas Prom, and today I have three very special guests. My friends John, Cullen, and Jerry from the Worst.Comic.Podcast.Ever. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. Our pleasure. Glad to be here.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yes, okay, so today, fellas, we're going to talk about the very controversial storyline from the early 80s at Marvel, that is colloquially referred to as the Rape of Miss Marvel. This story begins in the last couple pages of Avengers 199, where Miss Marvel, who has gone missing, was returning to Avengers Mansion, 9 months pregnant.
And it even picked up, I think, a little bit in 197. Is that right?
197, I think, was when she first exhibited signs of being pregnant.
Right. She's talking to Scarlet Witch, and she faints.
Yeah.
And then they go to the doctor. The next issue, I think she's 3 months pregnant. And
That's right. Excuse me.
6 months, and then it was like,
it's definitely a speeded up pregnancy. It's happening over the course of days versus months.
Right. And she didn't even get the advantage of then being able to yell at her kid later on, I carried you for 9 months, and this is how you treat me. It was more like, I carried you for the better part of 4 days.
Yeah.
And there was no pain.
Yeah. I think Carol definitely still has plenty to complain about, and rightfully so. I don't want to be flip about this at all. Because it's really, really icky. But, okay, so the bulk of our story really takes place in Avengers Number 200. It's a special double-sized anniversary issue. This issue is cover dated October of 1980. But according to Mike's Amazing World of Comics, it hit the stands July 15th, 1980. Beautiful cover art, penciled by George Perez and inked by Terry Austin. We want to talk about this cover a little bit, guys.
This is a classic Perez cover. I mean, you got everybody, you got some of them coming at you, some of them kind of standing still, which is a little different, I think, over the years. He tended to do more of the everybody's coming out. I mean, nobody does those covers like Perez, where everybody's charging at you out of the issue. But you got the whole team there. But the only thing it does feel like to me is it doesn't feel like a group shot. It feels like several individual drawings that are on the same cover.
It does look almost like it's been clipped together from different pieces and merged together into one artwork.
My thoughts exactly. It is definitely a composite image. But as far as something cobbled together, I'd rather have Perez cobble something together like that than most.
100%. And he'd only been doing the pencil in the book for a couple of issues, I think. Somebody else had done 197 and maybe 198 were done by somebody else, or maybe 197 was.
Yeah, Perez started mid-190s because he introduced Taskmaster in like 194, 195.
Okay. And then somebody else did, I think, 197, and then he was back for the Red Ronin.
And then he stayed with the book through like 204, 205, and then left. I don't know if New Teen Titans was taking up his time at that point.
Yeah.
I would guess so, yeah.
Or his lady wrestling videos.
That too. Nicholas doesn't appear to know about that.
I don't know about the lady wrestling videos with George Perez. Can you guys give me some help here?
Cullen?
He apparently early in the 80s ran a ladies wrestling circuit and created like videos and things like that. And we were in Kansas City, and he had come. This had to have been like 2002, 2003, maybe.
Okay.
And he was there in his classic Hawaiian shirt and stuff, and part of his table had product from the Lady Wrestling League, and so he's apparently a artist in the streets and a lady wrestling promoter in the sheets.
Okay. Jerry, help me out with this. This is 1980. About what time did George take over for that short but beautiful run on Justice League of America after, was it Dick Dillon died?
Yes. That started around 184 of Justice League. So I think that was before this.
Okay.
I'd have to look it up, but I'm almost positive his run on Justice League was well before this Avengers run.
Okay, fair enough. But yeah, okay. So, on to the issue itself. The story here is called "The Child is Father to..." co-plotted by Jim Shooter, George Perez, Bob Layton, and David Michelinie, and then with the script finished by Michelinie. And of course, the art throughout, penciled by George Perez and Dan Green on inks. Cool splash panel here, if you guys want to...
Yeah, they're just with everyone waiting outside the operating room or the medical room there. You have Wonder Man and Beast, Hawkeye, Iron Man, and Cap. And anyway, and some classic Perez machinery in the back, which looks very cool. But anyway, you can see Jocasta and Donald Blake in the background behind the closed door, in scrubs, no less. Donald Blake is. So anyway, yeah, it's one of the things that I did want to mention that I noticed just about the Avengers during this time frame is just what a great, awesome set of colors. Like all of their costumes, like they always look great. Like the color combinations and everything. Like every time there's more than like 3 or 4 of these heroes on the page, man. Like it with Perez art on top, man. It's just fun to read. But anyway, yeah, great splash to take it to kick it off.
Yeah.
And I just look at stuff like this. I'm like, oh my gosh, how long did it take Perez to pencil in all of this detail, which was a classic hallmark of Perez work anyway. But it's just like, oh my God, there's so many tiny little dials and knobs and everything in there. But then another part of me says, shouldn't there be a wall panel or something covering this up? I mean, I've got wiring in my house.
Right, but who has all this exposed machinery unless these are doodads that you're supposed to be making adjustments to? But it seems to be a wall right next to a room. This isn't a control room or a monitor room. That is weird.
And I would expect that more in the Baxter building than Stark Mansion. I mean, Tony can afford some drywall.
Right.
Right.
Whereas Reed, you figure maybe doesn't have the greatest sense of aesthetics. Reed's more about functionality than what it looks like.
Right. Very good. It's so funny. I'm so just used to like the absurdities of comics that a lot of times I don't even notice little things like this.
For sure. How does this door even open? I mean, does it slide one way or another? Does it swing that? I mean, it just looks like it's...
Yeah,
it's actually like, not a door. It's
a trapezoid. So, does it flip upward? Are there hinges on one side?
It goes DeLorean fashion where it slides up.
That's what I'm thinking, because of the way it's shaped. Like, how would you have a hinge on any other way? Okay.
Well, and then as you go to pages 2 and 3, the other thing about Perez art is that we don't see nowadays is how many panels there are and how much detail and things there is going on a page. I mean, there is pages 2 and 3. There is a lot of story and conversation and art packed into those 2 pages.
I especially love the layout for page 3, where we have our panel 1, which is kind of a long thing with the Avengers kind of gathering, and then 4 panels in the operating room straddled by these long sidebar panels with the floating heads of all the other Avengers. That is beautiful. I love it. Love it.
Yeah, that's an awesome layout. Now, to me, though, does it look like Ms. Marvel on both of the 2 pages maybe isn't drawn by George? I don't know. Especially on that page 3, that doesn't look to me like Perez. The rest of the page 100% does.
In the bottom left panel on page 3, especially, it looks like Gene Colan.
That's exactly what I thought.
Right?
100%.
Gene Colan, inked by Tom Palmer. That's what it looks like.
Yeah. It was like they brought in somebody to do one panel.
Right. But, even George probably has swipe files.
Sure.
Especially for a guy who works with so much detail and at such great speed.
Right.
He's got to have a morgue of panels. He's like, okay, that's good, and just kind of recreate. And that's fine.
Yep, 100%. And she looks, her hair looks great for being on an operating table.
Yeah. Really flowing. Yeah.
They don't have a little thing on her head to cover up her hair or anything at all.
This was 1980.
Right.
I'm sure there were people smoking in the room.
Yeah.
Jocasta, she's smoking.
Oh, yeah. I really like Jocasta. I think she's a really neat character that just was so underserved. Like they didn't know what to do with her.
She's kind of the other woman on stuff. Because she's obviously pining for Vision, and he's pining but doesn't exactly know how to show it or something for Scarlet Witch. Even though they're married, he still kind of obviously has this sort of inferiority complex about being a synthezoid.
Right.
And she just this whole run. It's just time after time where I just feel so bad for Jocasta, which is funny because she keeps saving people's bacon over and over again. Like she keeps being the one who is the linchpin in something, and then she walks off sad. People just ignore her.
Oh yeah.
She's there in the background so much time. She's never inducted as an official Avengers member.
Right.
She's just kind of there.
Right. They talk about it.
Yeah. But they never do it.
Right.
Right. Now, this is after all that stuff with Henry Peter Gyrick trimming down the team, or is that later?
This is after.
Okay.
That was 181 to 191.
Thank you. Hate that guy. What a jerk. But I know you're supposed to. But
I think they couldn't say. I don't think they could say, "Hey, the artists have requested that we limit the membership on this team to 7 members because they're tired of drawing 40 damn people in the book all the time."
Right. It's like, why do you think for the longest time you'd have kind of not exactly long runs for artists on, say, the Legion of Superheroes? Who wants to draw 21 superheroes? But yeah. One more thing about the Jocasta, it's kind of like, I feel like maybe writers didn't know quite what they wanted to do with her, because do we really want to retread another love triangle? Like we just did the thing with Mantis, it feels like not too long before this.
Plus, we've got an android, synthesoid basically, already on the team with Vision.
Right.
Is it a little bit weird to have another one? Plus,
yeah.
we've got Iron Man, who's not a robot, but is a guy in a metal suit.
Right. She's cool, but what she brings to the team and just ends up being redundancy after redundancy after redundancy. And it's
what also is interesting is her memory, her personality is all based on the Wasp.
Right.
So it makes for, one of the things that I've commented about when I've been reviewing the Avengers, the Essential Avengers books, is that it really makes for a very large dysfunctional family if you start trying to group everyone out. Vision, Scarlet Witch. Vision is loosely related to Wonder Man, and
right.
Wasp is now connected to Jocasta and Henry Pym, and Henry Pym, quote, fathered Ultron, who fathered Vision.
Right.
And
yeah.
Throw in Quicksilver, and it makes for an odd family dynamic throughout the book.
Yeah.
I will say this. I felt like this particular, run, I would say 30 issue run, starting from like 190 and maybe 180 to about 220, 225, I really feel like was one giant soap opera.
Yeah.
Like there's so much drama and so many love triangles and so much betrayal. And like for me, like, thinking back on it now, like the storytelling part and the soap opera and the dramatic moments and all that, that definitely was a hook, and then you mix it up with all the beautiful colors and the artwork and stuff like that. There was no way I wasn't going to love it. But yeah, just all the drama and everything reminds me totally of a mid-afternoon soap opera.
Gotta catch up on the stories.
Yeah, exactly. In the merry Marvel manner, or the mighty Marvel manner. But two more things about Jocasta, and then we should really get moving. But it's odd that she's based on Janet because she seems so different from her, so less confident. I guess she's basically a child in an adult body, but you know what I mean?
So that's how we talk about Cullen.
Oh, very good.
The Jocasta of the podcast.
Yeah, but also being that she's a kind of a copy. Like, did they ever explore the possibility of her and Wonder Man getting together? I mean, being that they're both kind of doubles of another character in the team.
They tried to pair Wonder Man up with a bunch of. It seems like he and Scarlet Witch kind of had a thing for a while,
yeah.
And but Wonder Man was always kind of the odd guy out. I felt like he was in some ways he was kind of a male version. I mean, he was a member of the Avengers, but he never seemed to really want to. The Avengers was like that. Instead of being an out of work actor as a waiter, he was an Avenger when he was not acting, and he was always the guy whose point was to show how strong the bad guy was by getting punched through a wall.
Oh, okay.
He was really strong. So then Thor could be the guy who came in
right
and really saved the day, but Wonder Man would always get hammered through a wall.
Oh man, right? I always like him. He's fun, but I see your point.
Job. Yeah, and that was Colossus's job in the X-Men, was to show you how strong the bad guy was by getting punched, so then other people could come in and save the day.
Very good.
Over the last 5 to 10 years, probably closer to 10 years, they actually had Henry Pym develop a relationship with Jocasta.
Oh, good. That's right.
I think, he was interacting with her based on the conversations. It was like he was talking to Janet because she has Janet's thought patterns and memories. And so he was, attracted to her, even though in some ways you could almost claim he's the grandfather of Jocasta.
Yeah, it's very weird. Comics are weird.
Yeah. So
the baby's born.
Right, the boy. Well, and before that, I just want to mention that the Human Torch saved the valley with fruit pies. So there we go.
Oh yeah, there was a Hostess fruit pie ad. I figured maybe we don't have time for this, but.
Oh yeah, totally.
There's always times for a Hostess fruit pies.
That's right. In the fruit pie ad, I love the villain is like a biplane wearing guy. He looks like Dastardly from like the Wacky Races, from Yogi Bear.
100%.
I'm sure that's not.
He has the ability to fly a biplane that creates snow. That just creates snow.
Oh,
and I'm not sure. Yeah, and I'm not sure why the Human Torch just doesn't light his plane on fire. No fruit pies. That'll
right. Hey, lunch. Yeah. Instead of punching the bad guy, why don't I give him some lunch? Right. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, so then we have a boy, and then they put him in a little pod.
Yeah, it looks like the pod the Beyonder was born in when he was a baby. Right. What was that, Secret Wars 2?
Yeah, predating that.
Totally.
Ugh.
But the baby's not crying. The baby's already showing some abnormalities.
He's autistic.
Yeah, and then there's a little bit more, and we see Ms. Marvel is clearly, Carol Danvers is clearly not connected to the birth, and we get another Ms. Marvel panel that looks like Gene Colan drew it.
Yeah.
On page 5, the next to last panel, that looks to me like another. If you just showed me that panel in isolation and said who drew this, I would guess there'd be a lot of guesses before I got to George Perez.
Yeah, you're very right. And also, sometimes Perez's art on Marvel books in the early 80s and the 70s, he's not quite George Perez yet. Like, that distinctive look that we like to think of is typical of his DC work.
Yeah.
This is beautiful stuff, but it's like he's not quite there, and maybe he's just not getting as good at inkers at Marvel. But yeah,
it's just the weird part to me is the rest of this page, every other panel, George Perez.
Yeah.
One face.
Yeah, I wonder if Shooter is not unknown for him as an editor to be like, hey, can you redraw this, or especially this panel or whatever, to be a little too hands-on. So he may have had George redraw a thing that he felt wasn't working the way he wanted, and he could have had to rush through it.
Or it may have been Dan Green filling in.
Very good. And to be clear, the credits, when I looked them up, they really said, layouts and like stuff by Perez and finished art by Dan Green. So some of these are more detailed pencils, I think, by George, and more details by Dan. So we're going to get a little inconsistency here, I think, throughout the issue.
I wonder if to some degree, because we're seeing Ms. Marvel in these panels without her mask on.
Yeah.
And at this point in time, her identity is not known by the rest of the team. And they didn't know that Iron Man was Tony Stark.
Right.
So they didn't know that Ms. Marvel was Carol Danvers. And I wonder if because so much, when we see Carol with her mask on, it's Perez.
Yeah.
But when we see it off, I wonder if they just felt like her face wasn't quite on model correct or something. I don't know. It's weird to try,
I think that's
involved, but
yeah. I think you may be on the right trail there, John. I really do.
Or if they're trying to do like the soap opera-y thing when you saw women in those things in an emotional thing, and they put kind of like they gauze the camera, they fog it up a little bit.
Very good.
They're trying to do a little emotional effect, add a little. Maybe they felt like, what, she's too sharp. Let's make her more uncomfortable, and went back and redrew that. I know we're speculating wildly here, which is what podcasts do. I guess,
yeah.
So.
Oh boy.
And these next few pages are really about, there's a couple pages here about relationships.
Yeah.
About, Ms. Marvel and Wasp are friends, but there's a lot of tension because Wasp is trying to congratulate her, and Carol's like, I don't want any of that. And then we get a page that's sort of Vision, Scarlet Witch, Jocasta, Wasp, and we're getting a feel for what the relationships are. And I don't know if sometimes in a 200 or a big anniversary issue, you kind of reflect a little bit on where you are.
And yeah.
And everybody's got to have a little time.
Yeah. I think that anniversary issues, especially on a team book, it's perfectly natural for it to be a bit of an album issue. If you're not doing flashbacks, then you're doing character moments. And because oftentimes these are double-sized books, we give that room to breathe because you're going to have your fight somewhere, but
you've got more pages to work with.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and page 7 is just a Hawkeye and Beast. It doesn't do anything to move the story on, but it's a fun moment.
Oh yeah, because both those guys are a barrel of laughs. They're really fun. I almost wish Wonder Man was in there playing pool with them too. He and Beast, their chemistry as characters, they have lots of fun moments. Hawkeye is right there too. So yeah,
it's crazy that we never really had, at least I don't recall, a Beast and Wonder Man even like a mini series.
There was.
Oh, was there a Beast Wonder Man? Okay.
It's a 3-issue miniseries.
Okay. Very good.
Around 2002 called Avengers 2.
Okay. I'll have to go back and check that one out.
I gotta find that. I'm sure that's loads of fun.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, that's a book that I'm surprised it wasn't done almost earlier. But we were. Yeah. This was the period where we weren't getting. I mean, we didn't get mini series in that kind of way until a little bit later in the age. Then we kind of hit that. That's like golden age of Marvel miniseries.
Oh my gosh! When everybody got a limited series, Gargoyle from the Defenders got a limited series.
Yeah, I did.
I mean, really? Jack of Hearts got a series.
Yeah, Cullen was a Gargoyle fan, weren't you?
I was. I did pick up that Gargoyle mini.
Cullen was all about the miniseries.
Yeah.
All about it.
Yeah.
All about it.
I'll tell you my favorite thing on page 8, and that is Don Blake surrounded by every piece of futuristic medical technology that you could possibly have in the world, is wearing that ridiculous reflective headband mirror that tells you he's a doctor, as if the stethoscope and the doctor coat weren't enough.
Right.
But this is 1980. I turned 11. I was 11 by the time this cover issue came out. I don't remember ever seeing a doctor in my entire life
wearing that
that ridiculous headband mirror thing. It was such a silly thing in the middle of all that technology. It seems like you can just have a flashlight. Have Jocasta. She probably has a flashlight attachment.
Oh, yeah.
That she could just...
She can do the couch, too.
Right, just her eyes light up. And
very good.
It's got everything else you need.
Yeah. I do have a thought on this, though.
Yes.
Don Blake, the character design, looks almost identical to unmasked Hank Pym. So the stethoscope, the stupid thing, like, I think it helps just make a distinction, even though Yellow Jacket's right there.
Right.
I think visually, that might be an important earmark.
I hear you.
Yeah.
It also looks like unmasked Steve Rogers.
Yeah. Very good. We have a lot of blonde-haired, blue-eyed superheroes.
He also looks like unmasked Ms. Marvel with a haircut.
Well, yeah.
Now, one thing to note here is that just in the mere hours since the delivery, the baby has aged almost a full month.
Right.
So the baby, much like the pregnancy was speeded along, the baby's growth is being speeded along as well.
Yeah.
Well, to get us along here, we'll kind of skip ahead, but the major plot points as we go along before we get to the real heart of why we're talking about this issue.
Right.
We get all kinds of anachronisms where futuristic aliens and dinosaurs and Native Americans and everything is showing up here around in New York and around Avengers Mansion. The baby's growing up very fast and showing all kinds of technical details, and Ms. Marvel seems very disconnected from this whole thing, wants to get back in her costume and get as far away from this thing as possible. I'm trying to think of some other little moments between different characters like we've been having. But those are the big things we're kind of getting along the way. And probably we get a super creepy moment, and not to do a page by page on everything, at the bottom of 15 where Carol Danvers does come to see the baby, and the baby's full grown with a goatee. He not only grew old really fast, but apparently had time to shave.
Yeah, to groom it.
Yeah, or he just grew it or just grows in as a goatee, which is cool too, if you can do that.
But if he's grooming, like, why is he not fixing that creepy eyebrow with the spike in the middle, Like,
maybe he did fix it like that.
Yeah, I think he did figure out. He definitely combed that up.
Right.
That's super gross. But then again, he is a son of Immortus, by the way. Right. I don't think we've established that yet.
Let's go back. If we can go back to page 11, Captain America is starting to question the young boy, and he asks where he comes from. My mother. Well, who conceived you? Well, by my father. All right, who's your father? I am.
Right.
I mean, he spells it out there. We don't know the connections yet as to who he's going to become.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, and he's got a big do, and then when he says, "Hello, mother," like, that's a grade A creepy moment for me.
Super creepy.
100%.
And it only gets creepier.
Oh, it's totally slimy from here on out.
Right.
Ugh.
So then we get a bunch of pages of action of the different Avengers fighting dinosaurs and all the different stuff, which doesn't have anything really to do with moving the story along itself, but it's some action pages because we've had a lot of standing around talking. And we don't read comics to watch a baby get born. We want some fighting. Then Don Blake turns into Thor, and that's the thing. Nobody knows Don Blake is Thor. Ms. Marvel's actually protecting him by locking him in a closet.
Right. I do like that that Don Blake seems to be the resident physician for the Avengers, so it's easy for him to sneak off and become Thor.
Right. It seems to me, though, that you could just get another doctor, right? It wouldn't have to be Don Blake. Like, I'm sure there are plenty of doctors who would be willing to work for the Avengers, and then Don wouldn't have to do the double switch.
Yeah.
He could just come as Thor.
Yeah, but do you really want to have another civilian character in an already crowded comic with lots of characters?
Oh, editorial-wise, I totally get it. Right.
I mean, we already have Jarvis. He's civilian enough for this book.
Right. I'm surprised they didn't make Jarvis the Doctor.
Dr. Edwin Jarvis. I like it.
Like Alfred. Alfred's like a medic.
Yeah.
He's so Bruce off and makes him watercress sandwiches. I mean, he does it all.
Let's take the approach. Maybe he's trying to double dip from the Avengers bankroll.
Oh.
A weekly stipend of $1,000 to be on the team.
Right.
And then Don Blake can bill for his services.
Right.
So he gets 2 paychecks for being in the building.
Wow.
Do you think Thor fills out a W-2 on that?
I'll bet it's just I'll bet he's just like a contractor.
Well, yeah, it's like it's got to be under the table with Thor because he's not a citizen of the United States, let alone the Earth.
Yeah.
You know.
Here's what I think. I don't think superheroing pays very good.
I think it pays all right if you're an Avenger.
You've got Wonder Man, who takes a second job as an actor. You've got Hawkeye, who is moonlighting, actually has quit the Avengers and is the head of security for...
Was it Roxxon?
Well, for the miniseries, it was Cross Technology.
Yeah, but that was a plot device, because that was Crossfire's dummy company for supervillainy, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, you've got Thor choosing to be Dr. Donald Blake. I mean, I just think that there's a lot of these guys who are double dipping.
Yeah. Well, I think, but in counter to that, Cullen, maybe, Donald Blake stays Blake and does medicine because he's called to it as a duty. It's a valued thing that, in society. And also Wonder Man, maybe he just loves acting.
I think that's
he's a very reluctant superhero. I mean,
Wonder Man doesn't really want.
He doesn't want to be a fighter.
Yeah.
He's a lover.
But, here's the thing. The Avengers is a steady paycheck, and acting isn't always.
No.
And so,
in 1980, $1,000 a week, $52,000 a year, that's a pretty solid paycheck.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Now, New York is expensive. I get it. New York's expensive. And if you got to fly to LA or whatever, I totally get it.
Somebody that live at the mansion.
But I mean, Thor, to get that paycheck, he's got to have a green card or something, because he's a native of Asgard. He's not even an American.
Right. I mean, Tony could be paying him in gold ingots or something, again, under the table. We don't know.
It's all mead.
And here's the thing. It may be the paid gig is an opt-in thing, and Thor, being royalty, probably doesn't need any of that stuff. So maybe he even though he's officially an Avenger, he may not be on the payroll.
Right. All right. So I think we've done there probably about as far as the Mole Man at this point. let's scooch ahead. If we get to 27, 28, because I think that's where, after all of the fighting stuff, that's where we really get back to the main.
So, there is some battle with time-dispersed dinosaurs, spacemen, Native Americans. Right. By the way, some really racist humor that I'm just going to say let's gloss over, but I want to acknowledge that, wow, bad.
You punch a Native American and, hey, I'm going to Pocahontas. Like,
no.
So, and all this time, the kid, who's now an adult, has been building this large machine.
Yeah, Marcus.
Apparently out of only circuit elements that are green.
Yeah. Well, we are working with the 4-color process here. And especially when you have panels with multicolored costumes, it's traditional for a lot of backgrounds to be a monochrome color.
Yes. So all the rubble is gray, but Immortus's machine is in green.
Right.
And we get this whole conversation where Ms. Marvel is like, but I can't leave you. I don't know why. Please, you must leave. I have to activate the machine, but I just can't. In that case, and then he does some funkiness with his hand that knocks her out. And then there's 2 panels where he says, "Forgive me, mother. Forgive me, my love."
Gross.
And Hawkeye infers that he's the bad guy, and it's the machine that is causing all of these time issues, and he's got to destroy the machine, which is not the most illogical conclusion.
Right. Even though Hawkeye is such a brash, shoot first, acknowledge your goof up later kind of character, he's not wrong here. Or his train of logic certainly isn't.
Well, and so many times Hawkeye as perhaps the most human of the Avengers. He doesn't have any physical superpowers. He doesn't wear an armor. He's not a god. He's not an android. He's the most human. Sometimes he makes the most human of reactions, and he's the one that ends up saving the day so many times because everyone else is looking at it at a much different level.
But I think Hawkeye's also known for having an ego. Mm-hmm. And I think he's got to have that ego to overcome the fact that he clearly is the human. He's clearly not Thor. He's not Iron Man. He's a guy with a bow and a bunch of trick arrows.
Yeah.
And I think Green Arrow was similar in the Justice League. He was the odd man out a lot of times.
Yeah.
He becomes kind of moral other side of the argument because they're polar opposite of everybody.
Both Hawkeye and Green Arrow end up really being the anchor character for the reader. He is basically a regular guy with a really neat skill. But other than that, he's playing around with demigods who are defending the world from supervillains and aliens and things. That's got to be a mind trip. It's got to be something really heavy to try and deal with and stay you. And I think that becomes very, very relatable, and it's important to have that character on super teams like this.
Yeah, and he does it, and then later he feels kind of guilty, but he's Hawkeye. He gets over it.
Real quick.
Totally. Yeah. So he blows this up, and then Immortus, who we really haven't seen evoke many powers. I mean, that was really the first, other than growing up fast.
Yeah, Marcus.
His hand blowing red and knocking out Ms. Marvel. We haven't seen him demonstrate any superhuman abilities, other than we realize now he was the one causing the time displacement stuff. But that didn't seem to be like a focused ability. It just seemed to be a side effect.
Right.
And now he wants the Avengers to kill him, or that's what he seems to be suggesting. And then we get the, let me explain to you my entire backstory over several pages.
Right. Get ready to take a shower after this, guys. Ugh.
Yeah. I was Immortus, but I'm in limbo, and so then I kidnapped this woman who was going to die anyway, and I wooed her. Oh, no, I didn't woo her. I just used my machines to make her love me. And then had a baby with her, which was basically me.
He implanted his essence in her, and so she experienced a condition similar to pregnancy that, it gave off those appearances.
Right.
I do want to make the distinction. Marcus is the son of Immortus, or a version of Immortus from like a divergent timeline or something weird. It's Immortus stuff. It's crazy.
Right. Exactly. Right. You just kind of go, okay. So Marcus, his mom disappears out of limbo. His dad then dies at some point, which they reference to Avengers 143 or whatever.
Immortus is trapped in limbo. He can't leave limbo.
Right.
So his ideal is impregnate someone.
Kinda.
Well, impregnate someone, but let because they can go out of limbo.
Right.
When he's born, he will inhabit that body and grow up.
Right.
And then he can release his other self from limbo at that point.
Right. As opposed to putting his essence inside Ms. Marvel. That's what the kids are calling. Apparently, that's what the kids are calling it nowadays.
Gross. I wish that the listeners could hear my scrunched up face, just like, ugh.
So Marcus steals her from reality in a moment of time, brings her to limbo, and he says he tries to win her over, but then there's a line, and I caught it the first time.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's talking about how he brings Shakespeare and all these people, and he wants to, finally, after relative weeks of such efforts, and admittedly with a subtle boost from Immortus's machines, you became mine. That's like, so after my convincing you I was awesome and a roofie, you gave yourself up to me.
Oh, it's disgusting. And he's manipulating her even now because she's gaga over him in these last few panels.
Clearly, she's still under the effect of whatever his machines did to her.
Yeah.
For sure.
Oh, it's so gross.
She doesn't even remember any of this happening, but she just feels this connection.
Yeah.
I personally thought maybe it was just the goatee.
Yeah. Yeah. But so because the machine of MacGuffinhood was destroyed, Marcus has to go back to Limbo. And so Ms. Marvel agrees to go with him. She says goodbye to the Avengers, and Thor swings Mjolnir and sends them to Limbo.
Right. The only argument that comes up at all is Iron Man says, "What, Ms. Marvel, are you sure you know what you're doing?" And she even says, "Not entirely."
Wow.
But say goodbye to everybody for me. Okay, I mean, I guess I could.
Right. My feelings for quite a while.
Right.
Yeah.
And then Thor's just like, "Hey, if you made your mind up, I'll go ahead and swing my hammer."
Yeah.
And take you back to Limbo.
Yeah. I am thoroughly disappointed that a group of 4 men in their 30s and 40s who plotted this, and then editor-in-chief who approved this story, none of them had any inkling that this wasn't acceptable. Shooter, I mean, you look at his writing career, like, look, he brought the Legion of Superheroes to great heights in the late 60s, but, like, incredibly sexist across his entire writing career. And, yeah, this is just really gross. I know we've come a long way with gender attitudes since 1980, but even then, I gotta think, this is wholly irresponsible. And it's crazy that the Code approved this.
I wonder if, I didn't read and I don't have the right issue. I have a couple of the later issues, but I don't have the one where they printed letters for this one. And I would be really curious to know if there were letters saying, what in the, like,
right.
What were you thinking?
They were.
Right.
They
didn't print it.
Yeah.
Which I mean, and some companies are pretty good about printing complaint letters.
Yeah.
Or will even mention we got a lot of letters that suggested this, which I actually think is really cool because it really does encourage a dialogue and a conversation when you know that they're reading and listening to these things, whereas now it's Twitter, and then we get, well, we just don't listen, the fans, we're going to do whatever story we want, even if the fans, hate it all. But to me, I bet this could have slipped past. It kind of is, what are you reading for? If you read this and you want to like the Avengers and you want to like everything that's going on, and maybe you don't care for Ms. Marvel that much,
sure,
I can sort of see somebody reading this and just glossing over, well, that was a fairy tale ending.
Right, and it was a
Snow White.
Yeah, and it was a way to write out a character that maybe editorial didn't really know what to do with. I mean, they'd already canceled her ongoing. And too often these superhero teams get to be the repository for characters that the company doesn't really know what to do with.
Right.
And so they depowered her or whatever, or wrote her out. But they went about it in the most ass way possible. This morning I was rereading an article from an 80s fanzine where a woman in fandom was, and I forgot her name and I'm sorry, was addressing this issue. Her article was called The Rape of Miss Marvel, and really calling Marvel on the carpet for this, and also talking about the follow-up in the issue that we're going to discuss next, Avengers Annual Number 10. Why don't we take a quick promotional break, guys, and then we'll come back with that issue.
Hey, I'm Jen.
And I'm Sean. We're here to tell you about our podcast, Worst Collection Ever.
And this is the show where we tell you about the worst comic book collection in existence. And it just happens to belong to us.
We have some of the worst comics from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. They're bad.
Terrible.
They're not worth anything.
No good.
Why do we own them?
Bad.
I own a number of issues of Terror Inc. and Guy Gardner.
Basically, we go around to local comic book stores and we buy everything we can out of dollar boxes.
We tell you about the weird stuff in them. We tell you about stuff that's related to them. We go into tangents. And we're very uninformed, so...
Oh my god, totally. But totally check out our podcast because you'll hear us just talk and joke about Marvel books and DC books from God only knows when.
That's right. It's our show, Worst Collection Ever, every Tuesday on iTunes, Stitcher, anywhere you get your podcasts. Download, rate, subscribe, tell a friend.
It'll be good and terrible, but good.
Batman Nightcast, a thrilling new podcast from the Fire and Water Podcast Network, hosted by Ryan Daly
and Chris Franklin. Nightcast chronicles the Cape Crusaders' adventures in Batman and Detective Comics after Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Highlights from this legendary era include
Batman Number 400,
Legends,
Mike Barr and Alan Davis,
Batman Year 1,
Batman Year 2,
Max Allan Collins,
the
new Jason Todd, Millennium?
You're not doing this right. Let me take over. Alan Grant and Norm Brayfogle.
Alan Grant from Jurassic Park?
Did you hear me say Norm freaking Brayfogle?
Oh yeah!
Son of the Demon.
The Killing Joke.
A Death in the Family.
Batman Year 3.
A Lonely Place of Dying.
Alan Grant, Alan Davis, Max Allan Collins. Why are there so many people named Alan from this era of Batman?
The Rise of Tim Drake.
Legends of the Dark Knight.
And that's just up until 1989.
Did anything exciting happen with Batman after that?
You'll have to tune in to find out.
Batman Nightcast, part of the Fire and Water Podcast Network.
Find it on iTunes and at fireandwaterpodcast.com.
Oh, we forgot to mention your favorite issue, when Batman fires Dick Grayson.
You want to find another co-host?
So, the next issue we're going to talk about is Avengers Annual Number 10, cover dated November of 1981. But according to Mike's Amazing World of Comics, it went on sale August 4th, 1981. We have a cool cover by Al Milgrom. This is kind of a admittedly slapped together kind of composite image. Michael Golden originally had a cover done for this, and Shooter approved it, but it didn't account for the contest banner that they had to run at the top of the book. And so this alternate cover was produced. And it's really fun. It reminds me of like all Silver Age annuals from DC or even at Marvel. It's got the classic Marvel cover copy, and of course the DC having many boxes showing that there are all these different stories or story elements happening. So it's really a classic looking annual cover. Neat corner box, of course, with the Avengers floating heads by John Byrne, it looks like, or maybe it's Perez. But yeah, then the rest of the cover art penciled and inked by Al Milgrom.
The point of this cover is to show you this issue has everything,
and it sure does.
It's king sized. We're going to have Spider-Woman. We're going to have the X-Men. We're going to have the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. We're going to see Captain America slam through a window and Iron Man lay down.
Yeah. Very good. Very good.
The least action-oriented panel is Iron Man. Watch Iron Man, and he's just completely prone, knocked out of action. But from what I can tell, it's just Tony taking a nap in the Iron Man armor.
Fighting early bouts of alcoholism.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, now that you pointed out, Sean, yeah, that is pretty not exactly riveting stuff right there. But yeah, this issue was so the story is called By Friends Betrayed, and it was written by sorry?
A little subtle dig right from the very start there.
Oh yes. Written by Chris Claremont, penciled by Michael Golden, and inked by Armando Gil. Now, I like this issue a lot because clearly somewhere at Marvel, thankfully, there was a grown-up in the room. And Chris Claremont addressed this very irresponsible editorial decision and found a way to address that and also write a better open-ended ending for Carol Danvers. And yeah, I do like that it's a Ms. Marvel and Spider-Woman issue along with that. It's like Claremont wrote those series as well. And of course the X-Men are here. This is like the most Claremont-y issue you could get. Like, you want a sample of this guy's career, pick up this one.
Only they could find a way to throw Iron Fist into this as well.
Right? Yeah, of course I think the rights had lapsed on John Carter, Warlord of Mars. That could have been a very interesting issue as well. Claremont wrote that series. I think that's right. Maybe Marv Wolfman did some of them, but anyway.
There was a lot of different hands on John Carter.
Okay.
28 issues that it ran.
Yeah.
So,
but yeah.
So this issue starts out with Spider-Woman, who's based in San Francisco, rescuing someone who's jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. And of course, Spider-Woman glides. She doesn't actually fly.
Right.
So with the weight of the person she's carrying, she can't really keep aloft. They land in the water, but they get to shore, and they eventually get her to a hospital where they find out that it's Carol Danvers. This is an Air Force officer that hasn't been seen in years.
Who happened to disappear about the same time that Ms. Marvel disappeared.
Weird.
Not quite.
Okay.
Because in her book, Carol Danvers still had her regular identity. And for a while there, she was managing Now magazine for J. Jonah Jameson.
Right.
So Carol Danvers was still out there in the populace, but she had been missing for some time.
I thought in here they specifically said later on that she'd been missing for 6 months, and just right at the same time as Ms. Marvel disappeared.
Yeah.
Wow.
6 months ago, she disappeared.
Yeah.
And
then I think later on they connect, because right now there's been no connection to Ms. Marvel at this point in the book.
Right.
Yeah.
What I think is interesting, she's been gone 6 months publishing time. And in the sliding time scale or compressed time scale in comics, it could have been days or a couple weeks. but they chose to go with that, which I think is interesting. But maybe because they're wrapping it up in an annual, they don't want to nail it down exactly to what where it would fit publishing wise. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and to me, in some ways, I'm actually impressed as we get to the end of this issue and how this gets resolved, that this was only 1 year later. Because the first story was in 1980, and this story came out in 1981. Almost a full year later. But sometimes it takes longer than that for us to go back and kind of recognize mistakes like this and go back to fix it.
Right.
So in some ways, only 1 year. Which when you figure, you couldn't, like, these stories are planned out so far in advance.
Right.
It wasn't like you couldn't have come back 2 months later and fixed it, because that issue was already in the can by the time the previous issue came out.
Right. The lead time was there. So, really what that tells us is that the backlash of Avengers 200 must have been immediate and strong, and they're like, we've got to address this and find a way to patch this up, fix it. And I think Claremont does a terrific job here. And he delivers a really action-packed comic book story as well.
I mean, if he really wanted to, he could have done it within the X-Men book, because he had full control at that point of the title. But I think it was more important that they resolve it in an Avengers issue.
Absolutely.
But it needed to have the Avengers masthead on the book to make things right.
I totally agree with you, Jerry. Although this book does feel like, it doesn't feel to me like to a large degree, like the X-Men are the guest stars in the book. Mm-hmm. It feels to me like it's a Spider-Woman X-Men book that the Avengers pop into to some degree.
Right.
Because it centers so much around Rogue and the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, and Rogue has taken Ms. Marvel's power, and there's so much of that going on that the X-Men almost feel a little aside to some degree of they're not where the action is centered to some degree. I don't know, maybe that doesn't make sense, but it's kind of how it felt to me a little bit.
No, totally. And there's a lot. Oh, go ahead, Cullen. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just going to ask. So after they bring Carol to the hospital, and there's the page there where they're going ahead and revealing that it's Carol Danvers. At the top panel there's a little girl and a nun, and they're leaving the hospital.
Oh, yeah.
And the officer's holding the door for her, and she says, "I'm Maddie Pryor. I've been sick, but I'm better now." So is that the first time that we possibly see like a Madeline Pryor in a comic book as a little kid?
I was confused by that, and I think Jerry probably has the answer for us, if anybody does.
I don't have an answer. I think it's probably one of those where the name was used and Claremont liked the name and just decided that he would reuse it at some point down the road.
It's such an odd interaction.
Yeah, because
why have this little girl mention her name at all? It doesn't come back in the story, if I remember right.
No, you're absolutely correct, John, and I felt that way too. Very, very strange.
Because it's the kind of thing you notice, because you see things in movies or TV shows where it's, and especially after you've been doing this for so long, where it's like, okay, that's going to come back, because there's no reason for this character to mention who they are or to even talk at all if it's not important.
Right.
Because it's just a waste of a panel.
Right. It's a Chekhov's gun with characters.
Right.
Sometimes the writers or artists will throw in a person's name or image just to say, "Hey, I put you in the comic."
That's true too.
And it may be that Maddie Pryor was some friend of Claremont's.
Right.
Very good. Okay.
And hey, look, it's here. And then he liked the name and just said, "I'll reuse it later and make her the demon fiend."
I was going to say the Goblin Queen later on. It's like, just this is going to be the most innocent outfit you're ever going to wear. Later on, we're going to put you in a Vampirella sort of.
You know what? I do like that costume. I know it's ridiculous, but
of course it is.
Yeah, underboob is really hard to pull off in real life, but yeah.
But I respect people who try.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I will say,
have to Google underboob.
Well, and I learned the secret that the cosplayers who do that with the boob hanging out underneath is they use tape to keep the whole breast from falling out.
Right.
Which makes perfect double-sided tape.
Yeah, don't hate the player, hate the game.
Right.
that's what I do with my belly.
Very good.
Underbelly?
When the shirt
Underbelly. Totally.
Yeah,
totally.
So there's a lot of action in this book, but I think the thing we want to kind of focus on really doesn't come around until the end.
Right.
Because there's a lot of X-Men, Rogue things that none of which really has anything to do with the Ms. Marvel story.
It's like there's a really extended framing sequence that gets us there eventually.
Right. And so eventually at the end, Ms. Marvel doesn't, because of her interaction with Rogue, doesn't totally remember everything that's happened, but Professor Xavier has helped her remember some of this. And that here's the only part of this story that goes wrong for me.
Okay.
It is that at the moment where you decide that you're going to have Ms. Marvel talk to the Avengers and settle this whole thing, this whole sexist storyline, you got to put her and Spider-Woman and Storm in revealing bathing suits.
Right. It is a little weird. I mean, as far as background and a visually appealing comic panel, I get to have the confrontation poolside that better than to have like just in a room somewhere.
Sure, I get it.
And Professor X and a couple other characters observing from a vantage point works narratively.
Yes.
And we get some nice character moments there. However, I agree with you, John. It's kind of like, especially considering that we're trying to address this really misogynistic storyline, and then you're gonna have TNA.
Right. I mean, it'd be one thing if Colossus was there in a bathing suit.
He is actually.
Oh, is he? Okay, I forgot that. It's been a while since I read it, so I apologize for that. But we did get some male skin there as well, and of course, Beast is always just wearing a bathing suit,
right?
So, with his and he clearly doesn't shave. I'm not sure the efficacy of slapping Thor, but I guess it's more for, it's for effect. It's for the shock value. It's
right.
not really going to hurt Thor.
It's probably going to hurt her hand more.
Right, but emotionally,
right.
Emotionally, you're looking to hurt Thor. So she explains. She goes through, and they're like, "Hey, we're glad you're here. We thought everything was so hunky dory with you going off to limbo. We're so sad to hear that things didn't go well with Marcus." And she's pouring drinks and with what looks like Tupperware.
Yeah.
Like the little slotted thing. That's classic Tupperware right there.
Oh yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And she reveals. You even heard him say that he was manipulating me. I didn't want to do any of that. None of that was my choice, and y'all just stood around and let him take me. They're like, well, you said you wanted to go, but you should have known. And so there's a lot of obviously emotional stuff. They all felt like everything was fine, and now it's revealed to them everything was totally not fine, and you didn't do anything. But then she's sort of okay with it at the end too. There's a lot of interesting emotional swings in these movies.
Well, she gets to explain to them what really happened and how they failed as friends and heroes. And I think they realize what they did or failed to do is to protect her. And, I think they make a genuine apology, and she is gracious enough to forgive them so she doesn't get like a villain turn. Because I'm sure Claremont is thinking ahead, like, I don't want anybody to take this down the road and whatever. She has to be kind of gracious. But, and still having gotten to voice how messed up this was. And so she has all the agency, all the power in this final act, and I think it's really good. It's some of Claremont's finest stuff.
But I also get it as a tough road to walk. If the four men tell her, we're not going to let you go on with Marcus,
right?
At the end of that issue, then is it them being patriarchal.
Right. But I mean, regardless of gender, I think in that situation, she was whisked off with Marcus in minutes. So, like, they didn't stop to, like, wait, whoa, hold on. We need to talk about this. I mean, granted, there was a time limit because he had to go, or all this time anomalies caused by his presence there. But they seem to do fine fighting all that stuff. More could have been done.
The other thing is, if that doorway to Limbo was going to be open for 2 minutes, and that was it, then that decision has to be made now or never. But if the problem is, story-wise, if Thor can take you to Limbo anytime you want,
right?
Thor can, hey, let's go visit. Why can't Wasp in a couple of weeks come visit the newlyweds in their new Limbo home?
Or why couldn't they all go to Limbo, take the conversation there, and decide, hey, if this is messed up, we're going to take Carol back with us.
Right. Or Marcus just go to Limbo, and we'll bring Ms. Marvel later on, when she's had a chance to pack up some clothes other than her Ms. Marvel costume. Because it sucks to have to go to, you don't want to go on a vacation or to your new house and you only got one outfit. And there's
one outfit for everything.
Right?
Right. Like, that costume can't be comfortable all the time.
Right.
Well, she wasn't in it all of the time.
Oh.
Because sometimes you're
see how Marcus manipulates things?
Yeah.
This is on Marcus. This isn't on me.
Oh, no. I will.
Back around to me.
Yeah.
Just
I got you, Colin.
I notice things doesn't mean that I'm...
You're just pointing it out.
I got you, Colin. It's okay.
Thank you.
For that's bad news.
Yeah. I feel like sometimes throughout this conversation we've been a bit flip about some of these things, but really, this is really irresponsible. And I'm glad Claremont had the opportunity to try and clean this up, but also it doesn't absolve anybody of making the mistake in the first place.
Yeah. One thing that, as we were going through back at the start of Chapter 3, Spider-Woman is visiting the Avengers, and the Avengers are given the backstory of what happened in issue 200. Scarlet Witch and Beast, and a couple of them are explained to Spider-Woman. And no one there seems to have a problem with it. So we're just going to recount the story. And yeah, it was no big deal that she went off to Limbo and that maybe she was date raped and all of that. And, whether it's Spider-Woman or Scarlet Witch, you would think that the female characters might raise a little bit of a concern at that point. But it's just like, let's recap and tell the story.
Yeah.
So one thing for me, and I wasn't totally reading all of the Marvel stuff at this time, but I will say that if I hadn't read a bunch and I read this issue, Rogue comes off as very badass.
She does, and this is her first appearance, and she's, I'm not really a fan of her, but she's great in this issue. Just very formidable, interesting villain, mysterious, all good stuff. There's a lot of really strong action. We really glossed over, the big midsection of this story. But the reintroduction of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, their big fight with the Avengers, which is awesome. Michael Golden's gorgeous art. But yeah.
The Brotherhood of Evil Mutants individually, and I think that's part of it too. Individually, if you know their abilities and their weaknesses, they're not necessarily the toughest group to defeat.
Not at all.
But if you're the Avengers coming in and you don't realize that Pyro can't create fire, he can only manipulate it, and you don't realize that if you can keep Rogue from touching you, then she can't absorb your powers or your abilities. I think they also did a good job of who Rogue could absorb abilities from and who she couldn't absorb abilities from.
Very good. They explained her concept very well, and the exposition was so smooth in story that was very nice. I also like that. Yeah, the Avengers are fighting these X-Men villains. The X-Men are not part of this fight. The X-Men don't save their bacon. The Avengers are getting it handed to them because this is a menace that's totally new to them.
Right.
That's right.
And I like that a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the only one who probably knows a little bit more about it, who comes in and at least for a little bit appears to be having a little better of it, is Beast. Because familiar with these characters.
Oh, absolutely. He's the one who knows these guys. But symbolically, I like this issue a lot because the X-Men or the Avengers are brought low by this group of supervillains, and also by the fact that they failed so miserably to do the right thing in a very delicate situation in number 200.
Right. Yeah. This is not. If you were going to do an issue that says, let's look at the Avengers at their best, this is not that issue.
No.
Like the idea of saying, fine, and let's look at them at their worst and see how and give them a chance to handle that and react to it. And are they going to be petulant children? Or are they going to be stand-up people who admit their mistakes and move forward from it?
Yeah, and I'm glad that it was the latter. And while it's not an issue that makes the Avengers look super awesome as superheroes, I do think this is, if I was going to point to, single issues to read that are really standout Avengers issues, this would be one of them. It's a really, really strong read.
And I'm normally a big fan of Michael Golden. There's a lot of good panels in here. There's some places where I felt like the art was a little. There's some eyes that are a little.
To me, what bothers me about this issue, he makes Rogue look much older than what she is.
Right.
I mean, she looks like mid-20s, late 20s when she should actually be more of a teenager.
Yeah.
Right, as we later see her.
Right.
So,
and Golden's conception of characters, like his anatomy is kind of, he what he does is he draws beautiful detail and the musculature, hair, and a lot of facial expressions he does are really good. His stuff can be kind of all over the place too.
Yeah.
He's not George Paris.
No. And I think you can't holding everybody up to the George Perez, model is you're going to be disappointed a lot.
Right.
If that's your business of what everything should look like. And it was every once in a while. For the most part, I'm with the story. Like I'm just going along.
Oh yeah.
Every once in a while, there's a certain panel or a certain look that just kind of takes me out a little bit. Then even again on that other issue, it was the Ms. Marvel ones that looked like it wasn't George Perez. It was enough of a style change that it just took me out.
Right. I want to say, I guess how I feel about Golden is I think his art is beautiful, but he's kind of the shift away from. He's kind of the start of the hot artists who are doing this kind of who are less focused on anatomy and consistency and more on being flashy.
But the only I would agree with that to a point in that I thought that his artwork on the Nom was very much not flashy.
Right, and I haven't read the Nom, so.
Oh yeah, no, I'm just saying stylistically.
Right.
It was an interesting book at the time because it forced him to not have the opportunity to draw bombastic panels of multicolored individuals fighting. Everything had, and there was so much to it, like with the infantry and the helicopters and the tanks and things like that required him to be more on point with his depictions. But anyway,
right. I guess what I'm saying is, as John was talking about, there are sometimes panels or facial expressions that kind of take him out of it. They're kind of like wonky looking. Whereas, Golden is a great artist and does beautiful stuff, but maybe there are artists that we tend to think of as lesser, like a George Tuska or a Don Heck or whatever, guys who are very consistent style-wise, who to many comic readers might be more appropriate just for comic book storytelling in general. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Well, guys, you want to? Thanks for coming on. Do you want to tell listeners where they can find you on the internet?
Yeah, for sure. So, if you want to listen to the Worst Comic Podcast Ever, you can find us on iTunes and pretty much almost every one of the different pod catchers. I believe the apps are collectively referred to.
Uh-huh.
But right now we're based on Libsyn, so Worst.Comic.Podcast.Ever.Libsyn, LIBSYN.com. You can find us on Facebook. We interact with folks a lot on Facebook. Just search for Worst Comic Podcast Ever. On Twitter, WCPEVER. We're also on Pinterest and Instagram is the other one. Instaface Slam Great. So,
as well as being at cons. We like to go to cons and set up, whether we're representing the Hero Initiative or whether we're representing our podcast. We love to go to cons and meet fans, and we're going to have the opportunity to get our three together with you in a couple of weeks, Nicholas, at Rose City Comic-Con.
Is that a couple of weeks? A couple months?
It's about 6 weeks. I think we're going to about a month and a half. Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
When you're going to be airing 304.
Oh, right.
Oh, well, this is probably going to drop in a couple weeks. But that's inside baseball, guys. Come on.
Right, exactly, right.
But fellas, I want to thank you so much for coming on. I know we've talked about doing this for a while now, and I'm glad we could make it happen. Thank you.
Yeah, it was super fun.
Yay! So, Comic Reflections is based in Portland, Oregon, and produced by Sean Roof. Until next time, we'll see you in the funny pages.
So which is the hottest Marvel character?
Iron Man.
Ant-Man. I can't decide between Professor X and Magneto, so both.
Loki.
Is Wolverine Marvel?
What about White Tiger?
What about White Tiger?
Doc Samson?
Doc who?
Star Fox?
That's a video game.
The girls go on a journey to determine every Marvel character's hotness in Ohatmu or Not, the official handbook of the Marvel Universe podcast you didn't know you wanted. Available on iTunes and at fireandwaterpodcast.com.
Trekker Talk, a fan podcast devoted to the adventures of 23rd century bounty hunter Mercy St. Clair from the pages of Trekker Comics by creator, writer, and artist Ron Randall. I'm Darren.
And I'm Ruth. We'll be discussing the stories, characters, and art in this excellent retro sci-fi adventure series, as well as having side conversations about other areas of fandom.
We hope you'll join us as we travel from the dangerous back streets of New Guelph to the depths of outer space and everywhere in between.
Trekker Talk is available at podbean.com and on iTunes and Stitcher.
Find us at trekkertalk.com.